Linas Linkevicius was the former defense minister for Lithuania, and he was also the former foreign affairs minister, very well known in Europe and in the European Union. Hello, Mr. Ambassador. How are you doing, sir?
How are you doing? Good to see you.
Lithuania has always stood up to Russia, and you and I have talked about this before, but is the blocking of sanctions goods from Russia to Kaliningrad, maybe a step too far?
Well, it depends how you look at that, because if we are talking about legal reasons and arguments, so there's also a European Commission explains that you cannot transport goods, banned goods through the territory of European Union, regardless are they going to some other country, or in this regard it's going from Russia to mainland to the Kaliningrad. So this is one reason. Second, when we're talking about blocking, so it's also not true, because there are also alternative routes, and frankly, transit of passengers, transit of other goods is going on as it was before. So it's also not a problem. And by the way, all these things were known long before, from mid-March, I would say. So this is exactly something which is becoming a noise on the kind of without any reasons.
Nikolai Patrushev, the Secretary for the Security Council of Russia, has warned that saying that these are hostile actions and that Russia will respond. What's he warning of, do you think?
Warnings is becoming traditional language of Russia, so we should use to that probably. On the other hand, it's a bit, looks again not very logical. I believe Patrushev, and if not himself, somebody else, experts should know. Decision was taken by European Union. It was not Lithuanian unilateral national decision, because it's a competence of European Union, and explains a lot. So why you should now attack Vilnius, for instance? If you have some problems, talk to Brussels, and we will be given clarifications. We also now, a couple of days ago, we gave diplomatic notes to Russia, explaining in detail what these restrictions could mean. On the other hand, we also should understand that Russia, if they're deciding to escalate, so they do not need any reason for that. It should pretext is enough, and there's no reason needed for the pretext. And this is exactly the case. So the chicken game, who will blink first, and using opportunity just to ease sanctions at any expense. At the same time, what is also I have to mention, by the way, if we're talking about blockade, so let's take into account the real blockade which is taking place as we speak. Odessa port banning export of grain, which causes huge damage and detrimental for whole world. It could cause even world famine. So this is not compatible even what we're talking. And here is just should be considered as it is. I don't know whether we should now discuss for Russia how to ease their life. Sanctions introduced not for easing the life, but to introduce some restrictions. And the schedule is also clear. So if they need to negotiate, maybe they can retreat on blocking on the support. I don't know. But this looks like there are no symptoms or no willingness so far.
Is this a card to be played in negotiations with Russia, Kaliningrad versus the blockade of food coming out of Odessa port?
I'm just mentioning theoretically. I don't know whether it's feasible, whether it's doable. Difficult to say, but if you have some problems, if you are ready to negotiate, you should signal at least that you are willing to negotiate and you are ready to do something else in your own behavior. So far, we do not see that happening, and this is the main reason why we shouldn't simply shy away from what we decided altogether. And I believe that's exactly the case. What we should focus on, what I believe it's very important, about next stages of sanctions, because it's if gas going not so easily, there are other aspects and items which should be included in the seventh package, and that should be we should start negotiating, and it's also moving so slowly, as we all know. So many questions, and war is taking place too long just for us to consider how to ease the life of Russia. It's not the case, I believe.
What do you think should be done? I mean, there's a lot of sanctions in place, more than even against Iran. President Putin spoke at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, downplaying all these sanctions, saying that Russia will emerge even stronger. Do you think that's just bluster and bluff? And then, in fact, Russia is getting hit over the head by economic sanctions that will slowly strangle its economy.
Now, Putin's statements are well known. He also saying that military operation, going exactly according to the schedule, as we all understand, and now cleansing of generals because of this schedule probably taking place, and now downplaying all these sanctions. He has a reason, because sanctions, they are introduced, but we all know how it's difficult. And for instance, even when we're talking about oil, this transition period by the end of the year, allowing Russia to breathe, and knowing that more than 30% of GDP comes from oil, so to say, that means it's big boost for the budget. And when we're talking about gas, it's even not discussed because technically not possible. So we should not forget that until recently we were paying 1 billion per day for these gas resources to Russia, feeding war machine. So of course he's right, sanctions are not working so painfully as it should be. So we should make sure that what we decided should be implemented to the extent which is efficient, not just sounds good, but also meaningful and tangible, which is not the case, unfortunately. So talking about sanctions, we also have to understand that they must be implemented in full scale, which is not happening as we would like to see.
And who would you blame for that?
Well, difficult. It's easy to blame, but also it's understandable. But we need consensus, and here we need consensus among all so to say 27. And until it's not reached, we know how it's difficult. So on one hand, it's difficult. On the other hand, in order to make sure that this process will be sustainable, you have to have everyone on board. So that explains what you're asking.
And what would you say to countries like Germany, who are reluctantly rolling out arms to Ukraine and going pretty slow on deploying heavy weapons to Ukraine? What is the risk if this continues on to Europe?
You know, this ice opening exercise still taking place, and I believe that this is happening. And when you mention Germany, Germans are usually or often criticized, but you also should notice that was really breakthrough in the philosophy. And recently, when they allocated or promised or planned to allocate 100 billion additional euros for the defense of the country, that was really something unimaginable before. And this consequently will go in the full scale of participation in all over alliance performance. And also we would like to see them as a framework nation deploying armed forces. Enhanced forward present forces in Lithuania also is very meaningful and more tangible, what we definitely needed. So those countries which were more reluctant, maybe they are becoming really taking sides quite clearly, and I hope they will continue. So not so quickly as we'd like to wish so to happen, but nevertheless, the process is positive way.
Why is Lithuania so quick to?
What do you mean quick? It depends on which. We are smaller on one hand. On the other hand, we have some experience. I really can say that one example really for others maybe to follow, until 2014, end of 2014, we were considered as, as island of energy supplies in that sense of that, totally isolated, 100% dependent on Russia. And in less than 10 years, now we are totally independent from any energy supplies. Energy, I mean electricity, gas, oil, in such a short period, because the right decisions were taken, and we're not going ourselves into this stalemate situation. What was not to be said about other countries, and now they are really facing big problems. Diversification not only sounds good, but also must be implemented. It was not done in the years. So you can say that we are quick enough, but I would say it was very painful, difficult decisions, knowing our dependency, knowing these traditions, legacy from the past. But it's always reforms are painful, but you have to know what you would like to achieve, what's your goal. And independence of energy supplies, it's same equal. I would equalize to the independence of state, of sovereignty in general. You can be member of NATO, member of European Union, but you are dependent on one single source of energy supplies. You are not independent, and that's also paradoxically, but this is true.
You are a Russian speaker, and I'm sure you've listened to President Putin talk about Peter the Great, gathering the lands again. Do you think he's in his right state of mind? And does Lithuania fear an attack?
Yeah, very humble to compare himself with the Peter the Great. I already tweeted about this, that I see one thing which is in common with Peter the Great. It's about window to Europe, because Peter the Great opened this window and Putin closed. So this is the only commonality you can see with them. Maybe brutality also, it could be some common factors. So, but comparing himself with these historic personalities and trying to behave or pretend that you are given by the God, so to say, to really like to compare the mission of the God on the land with this Russian nation or Russian world to be spread on whatever expense. That sounds really even medically quite suspicious. But this is reality, so we have to take this reality as it is, and really to be consistent ourselves, and not to shy away after every warning, which is becoming usual stuff.
Does Lithuania fear an attack by Russia? Should it?
The middle approach could be more maybe acceptable. I would say there's no reason for panic, and that's clear, but also no reason to relax. Having neighbors like this, you always should be vigilant and not knowing what to expect. So that's it.
Are you vigilant? I mean, with NATO, do you think that collectively NATO has taken the appropriate action by forward positioning rotational brigades, or do you want to see something more substantial, like a concrete poured for permanent basing, where they're not days away from moving tanks or even hours, but they need to be there all the time, NATO forces?
Yeah, obviously, in short, if you're talking about deterrence, so the best deterrence, A2AD, as in NATO language speaking, it's the presence of troops, which is definitely a big problem. And we have a lot of gaps of capabilities, not only with the presence, but in general, but also with the anti-air weapons, anti-missile weapons, and that's a big problem. And we have to really to fill these gaps. Not everything could be done by own capabilities. So definitely the summit, which is approaching in Madrid, will be very important and decisive in strengthening eastern flank in general, but also enhanced forward presence in all three Baltic states in particular. And I hope it will happen, because we are going to the good direction, and dynamics is also good. We'd like to see it's more faster, but at the same time, it needs again consensus. So we hope that that will be something achieved by Madrid Summit by the end of this month.
Last question, not what you hope for, but realistically, how does this war end in Ukraine?
It's wishful thinking. We're always repeating every day that Ukraine will win, because it cannot be otherwise. Realistically speaking, can be otherwise. It will be fatigue of supporting Ukraine, because Ukraine is also exhausted, I would say, also exhausted resources. They need supplies every day, basically, ammunition, weapons, which are late to be delivered always. And sometimes 10 times difference of quantity comparing with Russian troops, especially with artillery, so to say, which is badly needed to Ukraine. So it shouldn't be fatigue of support, first of all. And we have to understand that this is the decisive moment now when we are talking about Severodonetsk. It's not just Severodonetsk, capital of Luhansk. It's much more. It could be breakthrough in the war. So victory, it's not a done deal. That's my point in short. And we have to work hard in order to help Ukrainians as we promised, as we obliged, as we have to.
Linas Linkevicius, thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. It's always good to talk to you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.